So welcome everybody to this second online session from the Focolare Integral Ecology Group here in Great Britain. So this is focusing on engaging with MPs, politicians, and how we might do that. As a group, as I said previously, for those who were at the first session, we've only met 4 times so far, but we thought it would be a good idea to try and have an open sort of meeting and invite more people along to share in the way that we've started to as a group. So we're very pleased to welcome friends from across Great Britain and further afield. So we're welcoming 2 speakers tonight. We have Sarah Robinson, who's the Director of Hope for the Future, and she'll explain a little bit about that. It's a charity that was set up since 2017 and trains and supports people in how they might engage, but we'll have a bit of detail about that. And secondly, we're hoping that Thomas-Symonds MP for Torvine and a member of the Shadow Cabinet would be able to join us as well, both able to take questions. I think most of us are familiar with Zoom now after our living our life online more than we perhaps might have wanted to. But just to go through a couple of things as an introduction. First, as you've seen, we're looking to record the main sessions. Screen settings are set so that the speakers are spotlighted. But if you prefer not to appear on camera, then please do turn off your video. The breakout groups are not recorded, and obviously that's the opportunity for everybody to chip in. Second, please do mute microphones unless you're speaking. All except the speakers should be muted when joining, and you'll be able to chat, as I say, when we go into the breakout rooms. Please post questions as you have them and comments in the chat button at the bottom of your screen as you think of them. And please, could questions be sent to James Buchanan, who I'm sure will be a little wave. There he is. But we'll keep our eyes anyway as the hosts for any comments and things. So if you're not able to send direct to James, don't worry, we'll still pick up the question. The format for this evening then is that we'll have an initial reflection of about 10 minutes or so, which James is going to give us. Then Sarah will be sharing sort of tips and suggestions about effectively writing to and meeting with MPs and other politicians. And she'll give some pointers to useful information in the work that Hope for the Future do. That will be for about 15 minutes. After that, we have Thomas-Symonds, who's the MP for Torvine, already has held a number of senior positions in the opposition to give an MP's perspective on effective engagement, also around 15 minutes. Then we have a question and answer session for questions to either or both of our speakers. And then at 8:30, we'll have breakout rooms for smaller group discussion. Anything that's come up so far, opportunity to speak and listen, things that you'd want to highlight, share with others. And we've gently prepared a few people to help facilitate the groups, but hopefully there won't be any shortage of things to share. Then we come back together at 8:55, draw to a close, set out a brief outline of our further information and links that can be shared, mention our third session on the 22nd, how that's going to be, and end with a song performance from the Jen Rosso Performing Arts Group. So I hope it's going to be an interesting and informative time together. And I welcome our first speaker in James Buchanan, who's been a key part of the Integral Ecology Group from the first meeting that we held only at the start of this year. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you very much to all of you for joining this evening. Great to see so many of you here. So yeah, my name's James Buchanan, and I'm a member of the Focolare movement. In my day job, I work for a Christian climate charity, Operation Noah, on the Bright Now campaign, which encourages UK churches to divest or disinvest from fossil fuels and to invest in solutions to the climate crisis. However, this evening I'm speaking in a personal capacity as a member of the Focolare movement. So the short reflection that I've prepared for this evening, entitled Unity in Politics, will include the Focolare's charism of unity and how this has influenced the world of politics, some principles of living unity in politics and the importance of civic engagement, and then briefly my own experiences of seeking to build unity as a campaigner and the joys and the challenges of doing so. As many of you all know, the Focolare movement, which is organising this Countdown to COP26 event series, started in Italy during the Second World War, when Focolare founder Chiara Lubich and her companions sought to put the gospel into practice in their everyday lives, taking inspiration especially from Jesus' prayer for unity, that all may be one. So the charism of the Focolare is unity, which translates into practical and unconditional love for other people. Unity means consideration for everyone and a commitment to meaningful two-way dialogue on all fronts. It contributes towards a united world, one enriched by diversity and open to the common good. In 1948, Chiara Lubich met an Italian politician, Gino Giordani, who was a prominent and active figure during the first few years of the difficult post-war period, and a reference point for the generations that had longed for freedom during the years of dictatorship. Chiara Lubich wrote, "Giordani was a co-founder of the Focolare movement. He opened our heart outwards onto humanity, with all its problems and concerns, the rebuilding of Italy and the rest of Europe in the wake of World War II, the emergence of democracy, the division between East and West. In turn, from the spirit of the movement, Giordani received a new stimulus for his own political activity. We can see this in an address he made on universal peace, applauded by the entire Italian parliament, in the first bill on conscientious objection, in his dialogue on peace. Within a short time, a small but significant group of politicians began to gather around Giordani. They shared our ideal of life and sought to live it in Parliament. There, for the first time in a political setting, they experienced what I call the art of loving. Gino Giordani himself said, "I recall an occasion in Parliament when, with a group of colleagues, we were talking about our role as Christians involved in the political activity of Parliament. Suddenly, one of the most senior of the group said, 'Here in Parliament, we don't do religion, we do politics.' Nevertheless, I replied, when we enter Parliament, we don't live our religious conscience behind us on the coat stand and walk in only as politicians. I'm a Christian 24 hours a day, which means also when I'm in Parliament." So what is the art of loving, and how does this influence the world of politics? Well, Chiara Lubich wrote, "It is an art that requires that we love everyone, without exception, regardless of their party affiliation, that we be the first to love, that we make ourselves one with them in order to welcome them, emptying ourselves of all our worries and thoughts. If love becomes mutual, Jesus himself is present among us. It is a presence of Jesus that transforms people individually and creates unity among them. It is not simply an agreement of opinions or choice to follow a certain course of action based on the same political choice. On the foundation of unity, differences acquire their true meaning, and in mutuality, they become enrichment for one another." Chiara added, "First, be people who believe in profound and lasting human values, and then take political action." In 1996, Chiara Lubich met with a group of Italian politicians from both governing and opposition parties in Naples, a meeting which led to the foundation of the Movement for Politics and Policy for Unity. Today, this movement is present in Italy, a number of European countries, South America, and Asia. Here in the UK, there is a politics community of interest group within the Focolare movement, a bit like the Focolare Integral Ecology Group, which has organised this series of events, which includes a number of people with experience and interest in local politics, including Lucy and David Williams, who you've just heard from. During a talk to an international conference in 2000, Chiara Lubich said, "The movement for unity is bringing about a new political culture, but its vision of politics does not give rise to a new party. Instead, it changes the method of political activity, while remaining faithful to his or her own genuine ideals. A politician of unity loves everyone, as we said, and therefore in every circumstance searches for what unites." It strikes me that this outlook is very much in line with the words of the late Joe Cox MP, who said, "We're far more united and have far more in common with each other than things that divide us. In 2004, during a visit to the UK, Chiara Lubbock gave an address to British politicians at the Palace of Westminster, entitled "Liberty, Equality, Whatever Happens to Fraternity." In her talk, Chiara said, "The politicians for unity, having come to understand that politics at its root is love, realize that others too, even those who at times can be called their political opponents, may have also chosen politics as a vocation to love. They realize that every political group, every political choice can be a response to a social need, and therefore is necessary in building up the common good. They are as interested in the other's goals as they are in their own, and thus criticism becomes constructive. They seek to live out the apparent contradiction of loving the other's party as their own, because they realize that the nation's well-being requires everyone's cooperation. This, in my opinion, is a kind of politics worth living, the kind of genuine, authoritative politics that every country needs. In fact, with power comes strength, but only love gives authority. This type of politics builds works that will last. Future generations will be grateful to politicians not for having retained power, but for how they used it. Politicians can at times seem, these are my words now, not Chiara's, politicians can at times seem far removed from the people they represent. But in order for them to truly represent the views of their constituents, they need to hear our voice. They cannot be expected to raise issues when they don't hear about them, unless they passionately believe in the issues themselves. During my first meeting with an MP in 2008, as part of a group asking him to support stronger climate action, he told us how valuable it was that we were meeting him, since there were corporate lobbyists arguing that he should do the opposite. One of the things I really like about Hope for the Future, which we'll hear more about from Sarah shortly, is the encouragement to build common ground with your MP, no matter what their political party, and whether or not their political views correspond to your own. Someone once asked me how you can build unity as a campaigner, since by its nature, there can be opposing viewpoints. For me, it's not just about what you do or say, though of course that's important, but it's also how you say it. It's possible to speak truth to power with love and respect. Of course, it's also important to show appreciation when a politician or decision maker takes a positive action. In 2015, I had the privilege of being involved with the pilgrimage to Paris ahead of the UN climate talks in Paris, working at the Church of England, along with Christian Aid, CAFOD and Tear Funds, to coordinate a 2-week walking pilgrimage from London to Paris. After arriving in Paris, we joined an interfaith moment at the Basilica of Saint-Denis and a hand-in of petitions to Christiana Figueres, who chaired the UN climate talks that year. One of the most powerful moments for me was seeing people from all of the world's major religions together on the stage, united in calling for climate justice for the world's most vulnerable and marginalized communities who've done the least to cause it. Last week, a group of 17 of us in my local constituency met our MP in a meeting organised by my mum as part of CAFOD's Parliament in Your Parish initiative on restoring 0.7% of national income on aid, debt cancellation, access to vaccines for low and middle income countries, and climate finance. It was disappointing to discover that our MP had voted with the government earlier this week and decided not to restore the 0.7% aid target. But I'm very glad that we raised these issues with him in a respectful way. And I'm sure that even if he may not have agreed with us, in some small way, the meeting has made a difference. Together, we've done our part, and he certainly cannot say that no one has spoken to him about the climate crisis and global poverty. I'd like to finish with a quote from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, from his New Year message a few years ago. He said, "If you love your neighbour, you're going to be deeply concerned in the things that trouble them, whether it's about heating bills, whether it's about insecurity in families, and the need for good community life. It's not about politics, it's about love." Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, James. I think a lot to think about there, and I think it's highlighting that the personal actions that we take are important. So I think that leads us very nicely on to Sarah. So welcome, Sarah Robinson from Hope for the Future, and I'll leave Sarah to explain a little bit more about what they do and how they support people in having a voice and engage.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. I'm Sarah. I'm the director of Hope for the Future, as Dave mentioned earlier. I'm currently in sunny Sheffield. I don't know where everyone else is based, but hopefully the sun is shining where you are as well. It's a gorgeous evening. But yes, thank you so much, James, for your reflection there. It was really inspiring, really wonderful, and I think speaks really nicely to the work of Hope for the Future, which I'll tell you all a bit more about. But I just wanted to kind of repeat what James said, the Jo Cox quote about how we have far more in common than that which divides us. And it's just such an amazing quote, and as I say, speaks really, really well to the approach and the values of Hope for the Future as an organisation as well. So yeah, thank you, James, for sharing that. It was really, really brilliant. So Hope for the Future is a charity. We're based in Sheffield, and we provide training and support to individuals and groups to get the very best out of their meeting with their local politicians. And that could be MPs, members of Parliament, councillors, MSPs or AMs, any elected representative really, but during my talk will probably refer mainly to MPs just for ease, and also because that's the main political group of politicians that we work with, but we do work with those others as well. And at Hope for the Future we recognise that individual action is really important for embodying the change and the action that you want to see on climate change. But we need systemic change in order to make the right choices, those choices that will benefit the planet, available to everyone. And that's why it's so important to engage with politicians on this issue. So as Dave mentioned, we became a charity in 2017, but as a campaign we were set up back in 2013, and we began supporting churches to write to candidates in the run-up to the 2015 general election. And we quickly realised that there was a lot of organisations and a lot of people mobilising people to take action and write to their MPs, but there wasn't any support or training in how to do this well. And yeah, my first MP meeting, I wish I could say it went as well as James's did, but unfortunately, I found myself out after 5 minutes back in the corridor, realising that the MP hadn't agreed to do anything off the back of our conversation. And that was when we realised that actually we needed to begin researching, speaking to MPs themselves and seeing, what works, what makes for a good MP meeting, how to campaign well. So since then, we have moved away. We still work with churches, but we also work with people of any faith and none now as well. And so we support anyone who is seeking to influence local and national policy on climate change. And we've spent several years speaking to politicians themselves, asking what they want to see from climate campaigners, learning from our own first-hand experience, like that my first MP meeting that I mentioned there, and many, many more, observing lots of different meetings, and also researching different techniques, looking into, influencing research, using counselling techniques, those sorts of things to build our approach to and our training package in how to effectively engage politicians on climate change. And the approach is based on finding common ground and also an empathetic approach to political engagement. So you can see how it's so similar and so relevant to what James was talking about at the beginning. So when we first started, we found that many of the meetings we were observing reflected the adversarial approach to politics that you might recognise from the media. So I'm sure many of you will have seen PMQs or interviews with Jeremy Paxman where MPs are challenged and berated a bit. But unfortunately, this so often leads to conversation breakdown and not to the productive conversations that we need to see in order to make change, especially in an MP constituent setting. So we draw on an approach called nonviolent communication, and this is an approach by Marshall Rosenberg. He's written a book on it. You might be interested to learn more. But nonviolent communication suggests that any conflict situation is actually a manifestation of unmet needs. And I think it's helpful to understand a bit more about MPs, and again, this is relevant to any politician really, but they have incredibly high pressured jobs, receiving hundreds of emails every day, having to travel to Westminster early on Monday, back to their constituency late on Thursday, generally working 12-hour days if not more, and having to try and do the constituency thing on Friday and Saturday and then squeezing in the family time on Sunday. So really high time pressured jobs. And MPs are also generalists, so they have to know a little about a lot rather than having in-depth knowledge of particular issues, unless perhaps they're a minister or hold a specific portfolio for something or have a personal interest, I suppose. And the other thing to remember is that they're there to represent your local area, so they might face barriers to tackling a global issue such as climate change, whereas they might be able to do more on a local issue. So we found that giving constituents and campaigners an understanding of this and what it's like to be an MP was helpful to creating a more understanding dynamic, which led to more productive conversations. And also helping campaigners to understand their own unmet needs and why they might display defensive behaviours in an MP meeting is also really helpful to reducing those defensive behaviours. So, for example, if you imagine that you were going to meet your elected representative tomorrow, you might be feeling a bit nervous, maybe a bit powerless, but also, really passionate about this really urgent issue. And you can see how those feelings might end up coming across in some defensive behaviours during the meeting. So I mentioned at the beginning, the kind of core of our approach, the basis of our approach is in finding common ground with your politicians. No matter how much you feel you agree with them or disagree with them, and no matter what your political values are and what theirs are. So an example of this in action was some work we did with Philip Davies MP, who is an MP in West Yorkshire, and he was one of the five MPs who voted against the Climate Change Act in 2008. So he was not supportive of the climate agenda whatsoever. But some of his constituents came to us and said, we want to be engaging politically on this issue. We care about it really deeply, but this is our MP. How are we going to engage him on it? So we did some research and we found that actually Philip was a real local hero MP. So he was born and bred in the local area and just cared really deeply about constituent issues. And we also found that there were high levels of fuel poverty in his area. So we worked with the constituents and helped them to build an approach that they took to their MP about housing and efficiency. And from their perspective, it was about improving housing efficiency, in the constituency and improving national policy as well, in order to reduce emissions from domestic housing. Whereas from Philip's perspective, it was more about, reducing fuel poverty and reducing fuel bills. And that went really well. And Philip went on to write some written questions and speak in Parliament about the issue of housing efficiency. And we've got countless other stories of things like that, where constituents have thought, I've got nothing in common with my MP, but they've managed to find an area of common ground to engage with them on. And it's really important to get the balance as well. So you don't want to go in so goal focused that you reach a stalemate and you just can't agree on something, but also not so relationship focused that you're treading on eggshells. So it's about building a relationship based on trust and respect, but armed with specific actions that you could suggest to your MP or other elected representative that are realistic and within their power. So in order to find this common ground, it's really important to research your MP before making any contact and choosing a topic that is that area of common ground, so is of interest to you and possibly them as well. So you can find out who your MP is and a bit more about their parliamentary profile on a website called theyworkforyou.com, and I can post a link to that after I've stopped talking, if that's helpful. You just have to type in your postcode and it'll show you who your MP is, and then it shows you a whole profile on their voting record and what they've spoken about in Parliament. You can search for keywords even, and search for climate change, see if they've ever spoken about it in Parliament before. And then once you know who they are, you can then look at their website, look at their social media, and find out more about them that way as well. And then once you've done your research, chosen your topic, what you're going to engage them on, you can send them a letter or email to introduce yourself, introduce your topic, and ideally to request to meet with them. And most MPs will have their contact details on their website, or you can find it on the parliamentary website as well. So my top tip for writing a letter to your MP is to make sure you tailor your letter and make it personal. We use a great quote in our training from Kerr Hamer, which is writing a presentation without your audience in mind is like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. And the point of the quote is obviously just, think about who your audience is, who are you writing it to? And you may come across, mass letters and template letters that you can kind of just change the name or sign. And they are good for, indicating numbers of support. But actually, we've heard again and again from MPs that they much prefer personalised letters. And our own MP in Sheffield, Paul Blomfield, told us about the number of times he's received letters that still say, "Dear, insert MP's name here." And that's just not engaging for MPs, and they know it's not coming from a constituent, it's coming from a campaign, and they're there to represent and hear the concerns of their constituents. So that's what they're most interested in. And then my three top tips to think about for both writing your letter, but also in a meeting with your MP, is to think about your tone, your topic, and the clarity. So your tone, it's making sure it's collaborative, and you're seeking to work with them. And James mentioned at the beginning about showing appreciation, maybe thanking them for something that they've done recently. The topic, so thinking of that area of common ground, finding what that is. Perhaps thinking of a local issue, because that's what's going to be most relevant to your MP, and particularly a local councillor as well. And then the clarity, so making sure you've got a clear focus. You're using SMART asks if you are asking your MP to take action. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. I can post that in the chat as well if that's too much to remember. And also making sure it's not too long. So I mentioned earlier, MPs receive hundreds of emails a day. So, a page is probably enough for a first letter to your MP, if that's possible. And Hope for the Future are here to support you through the whole process. So from writing that first letter, preparing the asks that you might want to ask, and preparing for your meeting, and also following up as well. And we're there to be led by you as a constituent, but just there to provide support and resources, and top tips where we can. And this year is such an important year to be engaging with MPs and other politicians. With the UK as hosts of COP26 in November, we have the opportunity to show leadership in increasing ambition on climate policy on the international stage. And Hope for the Future has resources and support available for you, for what you can raise with your MP about COP. So do have a look at our website and get in touch if you'd like further support on that. You can also get involved in the Great Big Green Week, which is a week that's being run by the Climate Coalition in September this year. And it's a week of local festivals all across the UK. And I think Dave might be mentioning a bit more about that later. And on that, I would just like to flag that we're running a training session, an open, free training session on Monday. So it's coming up soon. But for anyone who is getting involved or would like to get involved in the Great Big Green Week, so you can hear more about Hope for the Future's top tips. And, I've only had 10 minutes to try and squeeze and give you a flavour of what we're about. But again, I'll share a link for that so that if you're interested, you can sign up for that. So that's Hope for the Future. And as I say, that's just a flavour of the training and support that we offer. But I think the key thing to remember, in the message that's run through James's opening reflection and what I've been talking about at Hope for the Future, is that it's about building relationships, finding that common ground, and that is how we're going to tackle this issue of climate change. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. I think that was sort of followed on very well from what James was saying, and it's interesting to see it's all about relationships. It's all about sort of building connections and seeking for that which unites, but being prepared to challenge and standing up for what you think is important. So that's great. And I'd like to now welcome Nick Thomas-Symonds, who has joined us. Welcome, Nick. Nick is an active parliamentarian. I'll just leave it at that, I think, Nick, and give you the chance to give a bit of an overview and give the MP's perspective. So welcome, Nick.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, and lovely to be joining you all this evening. And I'm afraid I didn't hear, James, your presentation, but I heard yours, Sarah, and heard a lot of familiar things and some very, very useful tips actually on engagement. And I'll come on to some of my experiences in a moment. But I am actually David's MP. David is my constituent, and I've had the great honour of representing my home constituency in Parliament since 2015, and I'm also the Shadow Home Secretary. So I've been in Parliament for about 6 years. I've been both backbencher and frontbencher, and I've had a lot of experience of different forms of engagement with MP. So I'm really just hoping that I can give you all a sense of what the most useful way is to go about this. But firstly, can I just say that this is such an important time to engage with representatives. It is always important to engage on issues that are important to you. But for climate change, this really is a key period. We will have COP26 in Glasgow. It starts, I think it's the very last day of October this year and goes on until the 12th of November. And as you'll all know, the Paris Agreement back in 2016 talked about keeping global temperature rises below or limiting the rise rather to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels and aiming to keep it at 1.5 degrees. Now that is a really bold ambition. And this is a moment now really to start to drive forward with this agenda and for binding commitments across the world to achieve it. It is July at the moment. We don't have a great deal of time, but this time is the really key time to be engaging with parliamentarians and others across the UK about what you care about and what you want to see happen for climate justice and to tackle climate change, not just here in Britain, but around the world. Now, first and foremost, I would echo what Sarah said about basic details. So find out a bit about your member of parliament. The emphasis as well, by the way, is on the word your, because there is a parliamentary rule that says that MPs can only deal with their own constituents. So you can't sort of just go through the parliamentary website, choose the MPs that you think would be more helpful. You literally have to go to your own MP, and whatever political party they are, it doesn't matter. They have a duty to help their own constituents. So whoever the MP is, that's the person that you need to engage with. Find out the basics first. Their name. It sounds obvious, but as Sarah says, I unfortunately often get letters that say, "Dear MP," which obviously it's a very basic thing. Dale Carnegie once wrote a famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he said, there is one word in the English language that is more important to everybody than any other, and it's their name. So getting that basic thing right is important. Their constituency office address, their email address. They Work For You is a very good resource in terms of what MPs have done. You can also use the online Hansard, which is the parliamentary record of all the MPs' speeches, and it'll give you an analysis of the kind of things that they've been raising. I would say, though, that just because an MP hasn't raised the issue of climate change doesn't mean that they're not very interested in it. It might be because of their role. The chief whips in Parliament on both sides, and they are the people who are responsible for managing the parliamentary business every week. They are the people who are responsible, once a party has decided on its position, for trying to make sure that MPs on both sides are then advocates for it. But they are very powerful people behind the scenes, but they don't speak in the chamber. So if your MP was a whip, or indeed a very senior whip, you might think, well, hang on, they don't really care about climate change because they don't seem to have spoken about it. But that isn't necessarily the case. It's because of their particular role. Also, most MPs will specialize in 3-4 topics. And again, they may well be topics that are related to their constituencies. It may well be foreign affairs issues. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested in climate change. So whatever they've said or not said on climate change, try to start on a positive foot, that this is somebody that I want to engage with. This is somebody that I want to start a discussion about climate change. In terms of what you actually send to the MP, I echo what Sarah said about keeping it short. My record is someone who sent me a letter that was 1,250 pages long. It took my staff some time and me to even get a handle of what the issue was, let alone be able to do anything about it. As a general rule of thumb, I wouldn't go over one side of A4. If you can keep it to one side of A4, I think you're already in a good position. But ask yourself the fundamental question, what do you want? What are you actually asking for the MP to do? Sometimes it can be to ask a question, that you want a particular piece of information, whether that's from a government department, or it might just be a broader question that you haven't been able to answer, you think the MP should. Sometimes we get requests to sign what are known as early day motions. And now early day motions are motions that appear on the order paper in Parliament. So every day you get a parliamentary order paper which will tell you the times of debates. At the moment, they tell you the people who are speaking in the debates. And what that document will also do is it will have the early day motions on there. And they very, very rarely get debated in the chamber, but they are an indication of strength of feeling about something. So if you get an early day motion that's signed by hundreds of MPs, that is going to find its way at some point into the Commons chamber. However, just because your MP might not be able to sign it isn't an indication they don't care. The rule is that if you are a member of the front bench, in other words, if you're a government minister or shadow government minister, you're not supposed to sign early day motions. So your MP can only say yes to that if they are on the back benches. Do you want the MP's view on a particular issue? Is there a particular aspect of climate change that you would like to know their thoughts on? If that is what you want, then just be clear in the letter that you are interested in what their view is. Sometimes you might want your MP to back a particular campaign. I'm sure that in the run-up now to COP26, there'll be lots of different campaigns, lots of things that different groups would like the statespeople who are attending COP26 to actually commit to. And if that's what you want, be very clear that it is that you actually want the MP to commit to. You might want a meeting. You might want a meeting with you as an individual or a particular group that you are part of or you represent. Just a tip for the moment, although MPs do very much like meeting in person, at the moment suggesting Zoom or Teams is not a bad idea, because most MPs at the moment are very used to dealing with Zoom and Teams. And I've actually discovered that you can do more meetings with more people, particularly if you have people who are in different parts of the country. So if you do want a meeting, it's not a bad idea to suggest that you can do it virtually as an alternative. I also think it's important to recognize that you might as well want to be kept up to date. Virtually every member of parliament I know does some sort of regular newsletter. So it may be that you want to know what the MP is doing on a regular basis. The easiest thing is to ask if they have a newsletter. I'd be very surprised if they don't. And you actually say that you would like to subscribe to it. And there's nothing wrong with asking to do that. And you may well then find out each month the kind of work, the kind of things that the MP has been doing. I really would, though, emphasize, and I think, Sarah, you said you'd had this conversation with my good friend Paul Blomfield, that there are ways of writing letters to MPs, which are essentially 2 clicks, and you get a standard letter. Now, it's no criticism of the organizations that do that, but what they are trying to do is to show an MP the strength of feeling about something in their constituency. So I've had the same identical email over 100 times, which is fine, but don't be surprised if you get a very standard response back, because we only have pretty small offices. Most MPs have 3 to 4 staff at most. Some of them will be in London, some of them will be dealing with constituency casework. So what they will do is they will draft a standard response to the standard email. So don't be disappointed if you get something that looks like it's almost computer generated, because it's just how MPs' offices have adapted to respond to the mass email campaign. And the mass email campaign will be about saying, right, I had 150 emails, I had 200 emails, but what they are not about is personal engagement. So if you want personal engagement, you've got to start from the point of a personal email. It's got to be an email that's written by you that is setting out your particular feelings. Because I'm sure the 120 odd people who sent me an email a few weeks ago on a debate in Parliament, I'm sure they didn't all have exactly the same view, and I'm sure they wouldn't all have sent exactly the same email if I had asked what their particular priority was. Secondly, important to be relevant. It sounds like an easy thing to say, and certainly with climate change, it's going to be very relevant over the next few months. But there's nothing more frustrating than getting a stack of emails about a parliamentary vote that happened 6 months ago. And yes, I'm afraid it does happen. I've had a mass letter writing campaign to ask me to vote for something I voted on 9 months ago. That has happened. So, try to be relevant to what is going on in Parliament and going on in the news. And I think what happened there is people are just clicking on a website about a certain issue. They want to say something about it, and they've just double clicked on the issue, but without actually realizing that that particular issue went some time ago. The other thing I would say as a Welsh Member of Parliament is also recognising where the power lies for different things. Now, I am at times a glorified postbox because I get every single issue known coming in my direction. I haven't got a problem with redirecting people to our member of the Senedd in Torfaen, Lynn Eagle, or redirecting them to the Borough Council, or redirecting them to the community councils we have across Torfaen. I don't mind doing that, but it is helpful if you look at the particular issue and where the power lies. Now, climate change is a bit of a mix, actually, because the Welsh Government does have now a minister responsible for the climate change agenda. It is partially devolved. Some of the levers are devolved, but obviously the principal COP26 levers lie in Westminster. But if in Wales you wanted to write about the NHS or education, it's not a great deal of point writing to me. I can still raise issues on behalf of constituents, but you're much better off going to the member of the Senedd who is on the spot and can actually hold the responsible minister to account. So try to make sure you're writing to the correct representative. The final point I would make is around expectations. You know, what is a good outcome for you? What are you actually looking to get out of this engagement with your member of Parliament? If you don't get exactly what you want on the first response, what's your second option, if you like? What would be your next best outcome? And that is worth thinking about, because you might just run into a member of Parliament who's got particular responsibilities, so they can't engage precisely. Like, they might not be able to sign your early day motion, they might not be able to ask the question that you want to. If they come back with that and they say to you, this is the situation, what can you then go back with as a second option? So my advice is research, first of all, get to know a bit of the background of your member of Parliament. Secondly, be personal and be concise. And if you're those two things, I think you've got the best chance of getting a really positive response. And thirdly, if you don't quite get the response that you wanted in the first place, have a think about something else, although it isn't ideal, might be a very good result for you from the engagement.
Great. Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing that. I think there's nothing quite like having it from the horse's mouth, if you like, the receiver of messages and things coming through. And I have to hold my hand up and plead guilty to both the mass type email to you and the more individual nuanced one. So yes, they both have a place, as you rightly say. So great. Both Sarah and Nick, I think, are happy for questions, and James has been keeping an eye for questions. So are you both happy if James poses the first ones coming through?
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Sarah and Nick, for your excellent and informative talks. Really, really helpful practical advice for everyone. By the way, please do keep sending questions through in the chat box if you do have any more questions for Nick and Sarah, and we will do our best to get through them. So the first question for Nick, what is the most talked about issue among your colleagues in relation to climate change? For example, could it be the feeling around Britain's commitment to net zero carbon emissions? What are the sort of things that you hear about most on climate change?
Well, I think it is, the timetable for the net zero commitment is very important, but in a practical sense, I'd say the debate about the transition from diesel and petrol to electric vehicles is the one that is most being debated in Parliament on both sides at the moment. And it is I emphasize one of the important aspects that there is to tackling climate change. I mean, I happen to think that climate change is something that is in every single aspect of policy. I happen to think that every year when the government sets the budget, every single item line by line needs to be measured against its impact on climate change. So I think it's a huge systemic issue. But in terms of the very particular issues, it is that commitment to net zero. But that issue of cars, of charging points, the feasibility of actually moving to a situation where we engage in that transition from diesel and petrol to electric, but also how we do it in a way that is about creating jobs, how we do it in a way that is within a realistic timetable, and how we make sure as well that electric vehicles are going to be affordable to families up and down the country.
Thank you, Nick. And a related question, I think, for both of you, really. What are the sort of key issues that you would recommend people raising with their MP at this time? Maybe I'll start with Sarah, and then I'll come on to you, Nick, again. So.
Yeah, Brill. Well, I think it's encouraging to hear that transport is one of the main issues being discussed, because that is still one of the biggest sectors that we need action on in order to decarbonise. And hopefully some of the conversations are around public transport and active travel, as well as that transition from petrol and diesel to electric. One of the other key issues that is really difficult actually to tackle is heating, and how we move away from high carbon heating of domestic buildings and also public buildings. So those are two of the kind of most sticky issues, I suppose, whereas power generation we're actually doing quite well on. In the UK we've got a lot of renewable energy. There's still a way to go, but we are more on track with that one than these other two issues.
Thanks, Sarah. And Nick?
Well, in terms of the next few months, I would be wanting to ask members of Parliament what role they intend to play in supporting the strongest possible measures to emerge from COP26. Now, in asking that question, I'd recognise that clearly there are going to be some MPs with more involvement than others. I mean, one MP, Alok Sharma, is actually the president of COP26. So, his local constituents, I think, can ask some pretty searching questions because of that position that he holds. But all MPs will be able to make a contribution to this, and it's very, very important that they do. I think that applies as well to members of the devolved administrations. So that simple question is the one that I would be posing to all MPs. What steps will you be taking? But also ask what their particular priorities are. And I'm sure you'll discover that the priorities will be slightly different for different MPs, not a big issue. We need a range of views. But just to get a sense, firstly, what is the MP going to do to support the fight against climate change? But also, secondly, what are the particular things that concern that MP? Because that will also give you a clue after COP26 of the kind of things that it's really worth engaging with them on.
Yeah, it's really, really good advice. A question, again, I think probably one for both of you, but from obviously different perspectives. I think Sarah mentioned, and I think you've spoken as well, Nick, about individual action, writing to or speaking to politicians. Someone asked the question, would it be better to do this with others than individually? I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I'm sure. Yeah,
Sorry.
you go ahead, Nick.
There are actually two different forms of engagement there with members of Parliament, because I will actually on a weekly basis meet groups of people to talk about different things. It's mostly been, as you can all imagine, on Zoom over the past 14, 15 months. And there's nothing wrong with meeting people as a group, and I frequently do. I would say, though, that is a particular type of engagement. That'll be in one category for MPs to do, meeting groups. I still think the most powerful form of engagement for an individual constituent is the personal letter. It doesn't mean, David, that the mass writing emails are not powerful as well. They are. But that individual email from your constituent, I still think, is the most powerful way for an individual to engage the Member of Parliament, because it's like the point, I think, the way you put it, Sarah, was you wouldn't send a love letter to whom it might concern. And similarly, the more personal the letter you get, it just, when you read it, if it is positive and it's personal, it's just a natural human reaction to want to respond positively to it.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think I could say anything different to Nick, because he's the one receiving these letters. I suppose one thing that I would add, or is maybe a question for Nick, is that would you say there is power in a constituency mandate? So of course the personal letter is really, really important, but would you say if that letter is kind of representing a larger proportion of the community, presumably that has power as well, because you are representing that whole constituency, and you want to be representing the voices of everyone, and not just certain individuals, I suppose.
Yeah, the number is what then becomes important. So it is a very powerful thing to do. I mean, I have, it has to be said, mostly on local planning applications, but I do get letters that are signed by a large number of people. And what that is if you went into the Commons, you can actually use the number. So if you are saying, I'm speaking on behalf of X number of constituents, then that does give you a sense of power. I think the balance to strike, and I think this is why there is no single answer to the best form of engagement. I think it's to do with different modes of engagement to do different things. I think on that group engagement, it's the number that, though, becomes more important than the individual names, I think, is the answer to that. So that when you get it, it does give you a real option in terms of being able to express mass opinion. So, and on something like climate change, actually, I had a letter from 500 of my constituents demanding action is a pretty powerful thing to say.
Thank you to you both. This should be quite a quick question to answer, I think, which is how long on average do you find it takes for MPs to respond back to emails or letters?
Now, I'm really interested in Sarah's answer to this.
I mean, it varies hugely. I would say you should, I don't know if Nick has a general rule or not, but I would say you should expect to hear back from your MP within 2 weeks. And if you haven't heard back within 2 weeks, then that's an appropriate amount of time to maybe send a follow-up to say, did you receive my email? Make sure it's not got into the junk box. If you still don't hear back for maybe a few more weeks, then you could try calling the office to say, I sent an email, a few weeks ago. Have you received it, and are you able to send a response? But as I say, it varies hugely. Some MPs will respond much quicker. Some MPs will take a lot longer to respond. But I would say as a general rule, that's when you should be expecting to hear something back. Yeah.
I think that's not a bad rule of thumb, actually. I think 2 weeks is pretty reasonable. It also, I think, as well, depends on to a certain extent, on the nature of the email, or the nature of the communication. For example, the 1,250-page letter that turned up to my office would not have got a response within 14 days, or indeed 28, because I literally did not have the time or resources to get through it. So, but if you're writing, what I would describe as, pretty standard length, sort of, 3-4 paragraph letter, I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect a response in that time.
That's great. Thank you again to you both. I think these are the final couple of questions. So this is one for you both, perhaps. How important are the priorities and ideas of young people for MPs, particularly in relation to climate change?
I think they are fantastically important. And I have to say as well that in Torfaen, I've met many groups of young people around the schools in Torfaen, and I've been so impressed with the work that they are doing on climate change. And it's their future, it's your future. So I think they're really, really powerful voices to be listening to. And I've had some great ideas come across my desk, actually, from work I've done with very young people across Torfaen.
Yeah, I would agree. I think young voices are really powerful, and obviously you aren't able to vote until you're 18, but you can still engage with your MP before then. And I think it's a really important thing, as Nick says. This issue is one that's going to affect our young people and future generations the most. So it's essential that they are having their voices heard as well, and building a future that they're going to live in.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Nick. Okay, I think this is a final question, and it's one for you, Nick. Perhaps this is a little bit specific to some of the things we've been talking about this evening, but someone has asked how you would feel, or have you got any examples of trying to make common ground with an MP of a different political party?
No, absolutely. And I'll just tell you the story, actually, because when I was first elected to Parliament, my name was drawn out of the hat to present my own private member's bill to Parliament. So this is a really unusual thing to happen. I remember one MP who'd been in the Commons for 30 years saying, I've been here for 30 years, my name's never been picked out. How did you manage that? And I said, well, there you are, luck of the draw. But it was the bill that I introduced, and it became law at the start of 2016, was about access to drugs. And these are drugs that are patented for a single purpose, but can actually be used for a secondary purpose. So there's a group of drugs called bisphosphonates, which are principally used to deal with weakening of the bone as people get older. But its secondary usage is actually as a cancer drug. And what my bill does is it makes those drugs far easier to access in the secondary purpose, if you like. And funny enough, I was on one of these calls last night, and somebody actually piped up and said that to say thank you because they'd had one of the repurposed drugs that went back to my Act of Parliament. To get that bill through Parliament, I wanted as many political parties to sign that bill as possible. And I had, I think, 7 political parties that signed the bill. And the way to get that through Parliament was exactly working across parties. So it is more common than you would think when you watch the adversarial nature of the Commons Chamber.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks, Sarah, as well. Thanks for all the really helpful advice and answers to the questions that you've given. I'm going to hand back to Dave now, who I think is going to explain how the next stage of this evening is going to work.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, James. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Nick. Thank you very much for being willing to answer questions. And I think we've all gained something from this. I was glancing across and I saw lots of people jotting things down. So I thought, well, that's obviously useful because people have seen or picked up on something to go forward with. What we're now going to do is move into breakout groups so that there's a chance for sort of discussion in groups about what you've heard, things you'd like to ask, etc. So because I'm not sure that Nick and I think Sarah's able to stay, I'm not sure that Nick is. So what I'd like to say thank you on behalf of everybody to Nick for giving up some time to go through these points. So thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see that people are making their way back, and hopefully everybody is out of the breakout rooms and back into our main session. I hope you had some good conversations. I dropped into one group myself and came in on the end of some discussions, but whilst there were only a few of us in there, it was quite strong feelings, I think it's fair to say, being conveyed, and people felt very much moved to try and take some action, so that's positive. We're coming towards the end of our session. One of the things we want to do is share some links and things with you. I don't know if we have that slide that we can bring up. He's seeing if anybody's able to bring the slide up. Here we are. Great. Okay. So here are a few sort of key links, and we can ensure that we send these out to people. Please take a note of the Big Green Week, which was referred to, I know, by Sarah in her talk. which is coming up in September. So I hope this has been a positive event for people. And just to let you know, we have a third session next week on the 22nd, which is going to be looking at reflection and action on climate in our parish, in our community. So you'd be very welcome to register for that. And we look forward to seeing you in relation to that event. You'd also be very welcome to get in touch with us if you're interested in being part of the Integral Ecology group, where we're trying to sort of keep in touch and share information as we get it. Part of that bit about working together and building relationships, which is so important, as we've heard. So our final bit tonight is to close with a song from the Gen Rosso performing group. So it leaves me to say thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you very much to everybody who's contributed and been willing to share. And it's been great to have this time. I hope it's been useful for you all. Thank you. Cue Gen Rosso.
Madre Tierra es el título de próxima canción. Hacer daño a la tierra es hacerte daño a ti mismo. Es hacer daño a todos. Esta canción es a la vez una oración para pedir perdón y para comprometerse en la conservación de nuestra tierra tal y como Dios la crió. Mother Earth. Little wings sail on heaven's sea. Neath the shore, waves of promise boom. You see, they listen to what Mother has to say. Child, life moves in a dream. Rest your hands, let the bird go free. Why don't you listen to what Mother has to say? Oh, why have people broken the peace with you? Oh, Mother Earth. Mother Earth, forgive us once more. Mother Earth, give us a chance. Mother Earth, praise the Most High.